I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
All right, guys. Well, welcome to the Libertopian podcast. This is a surprise podcast. I've done 2 already this week, and I'm about to actually do another one because my buddy Chris Smithson contacted me. He's ready to talk some politics. He's ready to set fires in the minds of men. So I'm going to hand it off to Chris. We're going to talk about a few things. You've already heard my take on the Rand Paul situation, but now you're going to get to hear Chris's take. So it's like a double whammy. It's perfect. So, Chris, welcome back to the Libertopian podcast.
What's up, man? Yeah, I haven't been on the past few, I guess, because I've been traveling around doing some work. But anyway, right to the crux of the matter. Recently, Rand Paul, which everybody should know is Ron Paul's son, came out in support and endorsement of Mitt Romney. I don't know what Chad said because I haven't listened to the podcast, but I'm probably going to echo some of what he said, maybe add some new things. But my first reaction is, what? 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 Because, and here's why. Rand Paul is like for the most part, there are a few differences. He's like a clone of Ron Paul in a way. Some things they differ on a little bit, but it's nothing too big. But at the same time, your dad is running for the president of the United States. Now, granted, he's not going to be president of the United States. He's not, probably not going to get the delegate count that he needs. I think he already admitted that, actually. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't matter because they can still have a convention where they need his delegates, and he could play a big part as far as maybe being appointed head of the Fed or Treasury or something like that, to where he's over money policy, and that'd be a huge deal. So it'd be like if your dad was running for mayor and was probably going to lose, but hadn't conceded yet, and your son came out and said, "I support your opponent." Okay, so 1, that's retarded. Now, the fundamentals of it are Ron Paul and Rand Paul basically stand for less government. Well, Mitt Romney says he stands for less government, but Mitt Romney, in my opinion, is a corporate crony. And I have no evidence to back this up other than the fact that it's business as usual in Washington. When was the last person that wasn't bought out by corporations or whatever? But and for Mitt Romney to say, and actually his statement was something to the effect of, Rand Paul, I'm excited to have Rand Paul's endorsement, and he will be an important factor in helping me to reduce government in the future. Really, Mitt Romney, you're going to reduce the government? That is news to me. That is a huge news flash to me. So I, didn't take him at his word. So I went to his website where you can look at Mitt on the issues and what he's going to do with the issues. So let's just look at trade. Let's click on this link and see what Mitt Romney's going to do about trade. Well, Mitt Romney wants open markets. So he's gonna make markets more open and get less government in our lives by reinstating the Trade Promotion Authority, which is the president's initiative. Complete negotiations for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a bad idea. Pursue new trade agreements with nations committed to free enterprise and open markets. Okay, that's good. And create the Reagan Economic Zone. He's also going to confront China by increasing resources to prevent the illegal entry of goods into our market. So that's going to be less government. Increase the resources to pursue and support litigation against unfair practice trade. So that's less government. Use unilateral, multilateral punitive measures to deter unfair Chinese practices. That's less government. Designate China a currency manipulator. So I guess he just points his finger at China and calls them a currency manipulator. And impose countervailing duties. So that's less government. And discontinue U.S. government procurement from China until China commits to our GPA. So he's going to tell China that we're not going to buy anything from them on the government level. So we're not going to trade with China on the government level. Uh, yeah. Okay. So does that sound like a good plan to anyone out there? No, none of that is less government. And that's just one thing out of 15 different issues Mitt Romney has right here. I mean, I don't even want to click on something. I'll click on healthcare since Romney actually wrote our current Obama healthcare. So Mitt, what it should say is I was wrong about the healthcare in my state, and I will repeal the healthcare that Obama fashioned off of my healthcare plan. So here's what he's going to do. Just a few things this time. He's going to cap non-economic damages in medical malpractice lawsuits. So that's probably less government. There probably won't be a bureau created to take care of that. So that's just one thing. So the point is that if you look at Ron Paul and you look at Mitt Romney and you go to their websites and you look at what they're going to do about the issues, Ron Paul is constantly just saying flat out, I'm going to get rid of this agency. I'm going to shutter this bureau. I'm going to get rid of this regulation. I'm going to let things operate as they should on their own because people intrinsically can get along better together than the government can as a big brother. So it just blows my mind that Rand Paul would endorse Mitt Romney instead of just going to the bitter end, waiting to the convention, and then after whatever happens at the convention or whenever Ron Paul actually comes out and says I'm done or whatever he does, then saying it. So it just seems like a stab in the back, and I don't know what you said about it, but that just is my take on it.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to say I had a different take on it. I wasn't happy about it, but at the same time, the way that I looked at it is I expected it because about 2 weeks ago I heard Rand Paul on a radio show. I can't remember what radio show it was, where he basically said, I will support the eventual nominee for the Republican Party. And so I said, okay, he's going to end up supporting Romney. I didn't know when he was going to give the Romney endorsement, but I knew he was going to. Well, I also found out that I believe it was probably also about 2 weeks ago, he was at a Romney campaign event. He got invited by Romney to come to the campaign event. And he had a 30-minute private meeting with Mitt Romney where they talked about different issues and their differences. And at that point in time, we didn't know what was discussed or anything. Last night when Rand Paul was on Sean Hannity and came out and said, okay, look, I'm going to endorse Mitt Romney. Me and Mitt Romney have had a private conversation. He is throughout the campaign, he has been somewhat supportive of auditing the Federal Reserve, which is a weak support, but he has been somewhat supportive compared to some of the other candidates on that. And then he also said that, I talked to him about the fact that we need to restore Congress's exclusive power on declaring war and that we cannot have a president who goes to war without congressional authority. And if he wants my support, that's something that has to be on the forefront. And that my thing is Romney's such a manipulator and he's so weak. He's like the everybody man, right? He can,
right.
No matter who he's talking to, he can shift his policy discussion to fit you, to where you will like what he says to you. One way or the other, you're gonna like what he says. He might have pulled that on Rand Paul a little bit. He might be somewhat honest. I mean, I'm really not 100% sure here on it, but I did expect Rand to do it. Now, there is a possibility that the fact that Rand Paul has endorsed this early, there might have been a promise of a potential position for Ron Paul within the cabinet. There could be a promise that Rand Paul is going to be a front runner for the VP nomination. There could be a couple things. All I know is that the Liberty movement has really splintered on this issue, and I'm not really saying splintered because about 95% of people are pissed off. That's not really splintered. I'm probably in the 5%. I'm not that mad because I expected it, and I understand how politics works. And I also know that Rand Paul, the Congressional Freedom Index, which comes out by the John Birch Society, every 5 or 6 months ranks senators in order of how they vote with the Constitution.
Right.
And Rand Paul every single time has scored 94% or 93%, higher than any other senator. I mean, by far. And so my thing is that he hasn't compromised. On his voting record, he's stellar. And just because he comes out and says, hey, and he wasn't even happy when he did it. He's like, I'm going to endorse Mitt Romney. I mean,
Right.
it's not like he's like, Mitt Romney's great. He's going to be so much better than Obama. It's not like he's really cheerleading for Mitt Romney. I think it's more or less he's going to be my party's candidate, so I'm going to go ahead and endorse him. And maybe there were some special, back-end deals going on. But I do want to touch, when you were going through Mitt Romney's plan here, one of the things that, obviously a lot of it, especially when you're talking about trade policy, is just more government. It's bigger government, right?
Exactly,
and
yeah.
I wouldn't be so incredibly opposed to tariffs if, let's say, we had no taxes in America.
Right.
Like if it was like the founders, because the founders, they had tariffs, but it wasn't protectionist. It was like, we're going to have a blanket tariff, and it's just how the government gets revenue. But in most cases, especially once you got into the 1800s, every time there was a tariff, it was always, it's a tariff to protect the steel industry, or a tariff to protect this or protect that.
Or it's a punitive tariff levied against trade from other countries to punish that country. Not even you protect, but like with China, what he's saying here is, I'm going to punish China for not trading with us fairly. Well, you let if you deregulate the market between us and China,
well, yeah,
you would find that companies would regulate themselves. They would punish China or profit from China on their own.
The problem that I've seen with trade, and it's like this in everywhere, right? The government gets involved in certain areas, and like we've talked about monetary policy before, but because the dollar is half of every transaction, it affects everything. And so like the government gets involved. They make the dollar the world reserve currency, which makes the dollar overvalued abroad. There's nothing you can do about it. Everything is traded in dollars. Everybody wants dollars. Therefore, no matter how many dollars they seem to print, we have to deal with inflation at home, but abroad everything is cheaper because everyone pegs it's not just China. Everyone pegs their currency to the dollar. So,
believe me, I know. I went to Scotland and saw the difference in monetary value.
You're not addressing. This is what kills me. And I just got done reading Albert J. Nock's book, Our Enemy the State, and he talks about it as well, that every single time government practices some sort of positive intervention and they mess something up, they make something, for instance, worse, or, they've done all this monetary manipulation. Like he said he was going to brand China a currency manipulator. Well, if you're going to do that, you might as well, because technically China does manipulate their currency, but so do we. So does England. So does Ireland.
Everybody does.
So everyone manipulates their currency because we're on a world fiat garbage standard. Everyone manipulates their currency. And so the reality is, if we weren't on that world reserve currency of the dollar being the world reserve currency, I should say, then it would not be in China's best interest to do what they're currently doing. It wouldn't be in our best interest to do what we're currently doing. And you would actually see that, maybe to China we would have a trade deficit, but overall we wouldn't have a trade deficit. Our trade would have to be equilibrium. If you're on a gold standard, you can't consume more than you produce.
Right.
It equals out. And the reality is we don't. He's worried about the trade deficit, which is good, but he's blaming a consequence of other policies and not addressing the real structural problem that's causing that trade imbalance to take place. I mean, I looked at the new trade numbers today. Our trade deficit just for the month was $53 billion, and that's not to China. That's just period. That means that we consumed this past month $53 billion worth of goods from other countries that we didn't produce anything of value for it. We just gave them dollars that are worthless. And so
because they mean nothing.
They mean nothing.
Yeah.
And so what kills me, and liberals will make this point, they're wrong with their solutions, obviously. But a lot of times they'll make a point. They'll say, the United States is living above our means. We're basically enslaving the rest of the world so we can live above our standard. And technically that's true to an extent, because if you look at it, this past year, $600 billion we consumed. So that means that around the world, they produced $600 billion worth of goods and services and productivity that they didn't get to enjoy consuming themselves. The Chinese workers, They produce all this stuff, and they don't get to because their communist country inflates their productivity away, and so it makes it easier to ship it to America. But then they can't afford to buy the shit. They can't afford the iPad that they're fucking making, and so it's bullshit. But it's not China's fault, and it's not other countries' fault for manipulating their currency. It's really, I don't even want to say it's the United States' fault because, yeah, we're participating in it, but I forgot the name of the conference that settled this and made the dollar the world reserve currency. Bretton Woods. The Bretton Woods Agreement just destroyed any semblance of competing currencies around the world. It was everything will be tied to the dollar, and that's it.
Which is ridiculous because when you talk about fiat money, if everything's tied to the dollar, what is the dollar tied to? Nothing. The dollar represents nothing.
Yeah, well, it used to be tied to gold, and when they did this, when they did the original,
that's what I'm getting at. Yeah, is that it was tied to gold, which makes sense. Okay, we're going to tie it to the dollar. The dollar's tied to gold, so therefore we're really on a gold standard as a world, as a planet. But when the dollar is no longer on a gold standard, you're tying the world currency to pieces of paper that don't mean anything. They're just given a value based on nothing.
Yeah.
So.
And you can even look at, when Nixon took us off the gold standard, I think it took us off the gold standard like in 1974. And even though it wasn't a hard gold standard, it had no redeemability, it still had to keep its peg to gold. So, for instance, if you look back at the trade numbers, the U.S. did not run perpetual trade deficits until after Nixon took us off the gold standard. Because once we were no longer tied to gold, we just kept inflating our currency, and then everyone else just had to inflate their currency to keep the peg, and so the U.S. was able to just have perpetual trade deficits. And I can't see why no one doesn't see that correlation. Like, okay, we went off the gold standard, and then we started inflating, and we've never run a trade surplus since. I mean,
because the reason is simple. It's because in order for you to acknowledge that fact, means that you would have to do something about it, and what you would have to do is say, well, perhaps we should go back to a gold standard, which would be incredibly painful for a time, but in the long run would generate ridiculous prosperity for the nation again if we did that. But yeah, we'd have to go through some not growing pains, some shrinking pains, I guess you could say it, before we could get back to where things could level themselves out and regulate.
Oh yeah, I mean it would definitely be painful, and it's going to be painful no matter what. And I was saying earlier today, I said, you know what? I don't really care, because if Rand Paul, or not Rand Paul, but if let's say Ron Paul or Gary Johnson were to win, the reality is their policies would put the U.S. in some very, very, very hardcore temporary pain.
Times.
And the reality is there's a good chance that no matter who takes over from here, because the damage has been so bad for so long that I'm almost to the point now where I'm like, okay, just leave the socialist in, because just let him destroy it.
Yeah.
And let them because I don't want there to be a situation where historians look back and say, well, everything was good, and then a libertarian became president, and everything fell apart. They destroyed America. When really it was the socialism that destroyed America.
Right, like a libertarian gets into the office, and then suddenly all these things that have built up collapse finally, and then they blame it on the libertarian president, and everybody for another 100 years says, "Oh, libertarians are crazy," and
socialism works.
Yeah, socialism was working just fine. We had awesome standard of living and trade and all that right before Ron Paul or Rand Paul became president, and then boom, it all exploded. But what people don't realize is that, and I've heard this so much, well, if we went to a gold standard, or if we let Ron Paul into office, or we did this or that, then he's going to do all these things and it's going to be tough times. Well, wake up, America, because tough times are here. They've been here for quite a few years now, supposedly. I haven't had tough times. I don't know about you. I mean, to Americans, tough times are, I had to go trade in my dually and get a economic car, and I can still buy. I'm still the most obese nation in the world. I have money. I can afford to be morbidly obese, and that's tough times for America.
It's tough.
I can't go to the movies every week now. I can only go once a month. So I mean, that's ridiculous. Yeah. But we're in for super tough times anyway. So it's like, we either pull the Band-Aid off really fast and get to healing, or B, we leave it on and let whatever's under there fester until when the Band-Aid finally falls off, there's a gaping, horrible, infested, oozing wound that is catastrophic
Actually, your arm falls off. You see?
Yeah,
in fact, it's so bad. It's so bad that it spread all the way up your arm to your brain, and your brain has an aneurysm, and it just explodes, and
you die.
And you die. Yeah,
and you die.
Exactly.
So yeah, so that's going forward what we're looking at, and people don't realize that. People don't get enraged over things anymore. They don't get upset about it, and they'd rather just meander along in this lackadaisical malaise.
Oh yeah.
And not do anything about it and go through the pain it's going to take. Which I think that our generation, once this generation that's already in power dies or moves on or retires, I think that our generation has a potential to being the next greatest generation and truly mean it because of the principles of liberty that are taking hold with, younger people today, because people are actually looking at it and going, I grew up in history in the 50s when the greatest generation came along, quote unquote greatest generation, this bunch of crap. But when they came along, what was their history of America? It was nothing but prosperity except for the Great Depression, and even at the time it was misunderstood. So the 60s and 70s, what kind of history did you have to look at? Well, you had the 60s, which was exactly what it was. It was love, sex, and rock and roll. You had the 70s, which was basically some bad economic times, but no one knew why, really, and they finally figured it out in the 80s when Reagan came along, but he did some things that weren't that great. In the 80s, we looked back and said how awesome the 80s are. In the 90s, we said, wow, prosperity. And then now, you have a generation that came up in prosperity, but the history they taught was all these other decades that they could look at and say, wow, this is how America has been and has changed. And now with the last 10 years we've had, we can actually look at it and go, well, we've seen down, we've seen up, and we've seen down. So we know what causes good and we know what causes bad, and we actually study real history. So let's get back to liberty, deregulation, free market principles, and laissez-faire economics, and just go from there. And hopefully it will be before America completely explodes and becomes the next Great Britain. Because Britain went through this as well. They had an empire. And now they're just a commonwealth. They're not even an empire. They don't really rule anything. They have an island, and they have a bunch of countries that say that they're under Britain's influence, but they're not. So I mean, that's gonna be us. We're gonna be Rome. We're gonna be Britain, and somebody else will step up to the plate, be it China or India or Brazil or any other place that has a free market than we have. So
yeah,
moving on.
Well, just to conclude there, that was what me and Chris described as Mitt Romney's garbage plan. And exactly. I would like to point out something real quick before we go on. This is a forum question that Chris found on a forum. We're going to go to it in a second. But I still don't have this clip yet, and I really want to get it because I was listening to Peter Schiff's show today. And yesterday he testified before Congress over the what's the name of that?
Fast and Furious?
No, not Fast and Furious. It was the FHA loans and stuff, okay. The government financed loans and crap. But for whatever reason, some liberal congressmen were really just hounding him over flood insurance for some reason because he had made a comment that the government shouldn't be involved in flood insurance. And so they got really upset with that and started actually, I did find it. I'm gonna actually when I do this podcast, I'm gonna put it in the podcast or at least part of it. But I remember one part. The congressman was like, "Well, in 1911, there was a bad flooding of the Mississippi River, and so that's why we have the flood insurance. And you're trying to take that away from people." And basically, Peter Schiff was like, "No." He said, "What I'm telling you is that the free market can handle this better. And secondly, it's not in the Constitution. Where is it in the Constitution that you should provide people with flood insurance?" And then the congressman got mad and he said something ridiculous. And then when Peter Schiff tried to comment back at him, because they're having a discussion, it's a panel. Right. Yeah. He said, "No, that's enough of you." I'm basically just sitting up on high.
Dismissed him.
Yeah, dismissed him. "I'm going to go to so-and-so." And I'm like, "You fucking dickhead." And I would have called him that. I probably wouldn't have called him that, but I would have basically looked at the guy when maybe not right then, because I wouldn't have wanted than to bring in thugs and like beat me up or something.
Right.
So
take you to the Senate room for unruly people.
Yeah.
Where they beat you.
Yeah. And so I basically would just wait until it got back around to me, and I'd be like, "Excuse me, I understand that you're sitting up on high and you think you're very important because you're a parasitical leech on society, but the reality is
you're an elected official.
Yeah, I'm here to help you, okay? I actually work in the real world. I know you're in this Alice in Wonderland situation where you don't really know how the world works. I'm here to tell you. I'm here to try to convince you and tell you what's actually going on and what works and what doesn't work, okay?
Right.
If you don't want me here and you don't like what I have to say, then don't invite me. But when I try to comment, don't dismiss me and treat me like garbage." Continue.
Right. He also should have said, "You're a servant, by the way." So serving is not telling me that you're dismissing me. And secondly, do you even know who I am? I'm Peter Schiff. Do you know anything about what I predicted or said in the past that has come true? Everything that you probably voted for and liked before it happened that was detrimental, such as the collapse of the economy, I was saying it was going to happen, and you probably didn't believe me.
Exactly how it happened.
So why am I here? I'm an expert. That's why I'm here. Are you an expert on what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Oh, you are? Well, then you should be sitting in my seat. But you're not. I am. See, it says Peter Schiff next to my microphone. So you should probably listen to what I have to say instead of dismissing me like a fool. Don't be a buffoon.
Don't be a buffoon. So, yeah, I mean, I'm going to watch it here in a minute, and I might put it in this podcast. I might not. I might actually put it in another podcast and then comment on it. Heck, I don't know. You know what, guys? I might just do a podcast every damn day. Because
there's so much out there.
I did one 2 days ago, and then the stuff came out with Rand Paul Day. I was like, I gotta do another podcast. I've got to comment on this. So I did another podcast, and then Bernanke testified yesterday before Congress and said a lot of ridiculous shit. He got owned by Jim DeMint.
I like Jim DeMint.
Jim DeMint was like, so you have interest rates artificially low, and the U.S. government is able to borrow against that. And what I'm concerned with is that when interest rates go up, the amount of money it's going to cost to service this debt is not going to be feasible. And then Bernanke's like, well, let's just say interest rates go up 1%, okay? They're at zero.
Right.
They're at zero.
Right.
If they go up 1%, that's only $100 billion, for the year.
It's only. Did he actually say it's only $100?
No, it gets better. It gets better. Jim DeMint.
Before you go any further, it's only $100 billion. Okay. Yeah. Why didn't someone say Bernanke? And he may have said this. I don't know. $100 billion, buddy. One, that's a lot of money. I don't know where the world you're living in, your printing press that you live in. Number two, do you know what the debt is right now? Do you have any idea? Because you should. And if you don't, you're fired. You're fired.
Well,
go ahead and kill yourself.
Prior
have
to this,
Marine guards outside come in and take rifles and shoot you in your face because you don't know that we are trillions of dollars in debt. And you said it's only $100 billion.
It's only $100 billion.
How about you don't set interest rates? You let the market set them, and then guess what? We don't have to pay any hundreds of billions of dollars because everything is at the correct value. How about that?
He gets better because basically Jim DeMint, before Jim DeMint said that when he was talking about servicing the debt, he was like, our deficit right now is currently $1 trillion. And so he's like, well, it's, in comparison to the deficit of $1 trillion, it would only add $100 billion to the deficit if interest rates went up 1%. So then Jim DeMint says $100 billion. We're talking about real money here. He said that's $1 trillion in 10 years. Okay, he said $1 trillion in 10 years, right?
Right.
And Bernanke is like, oh no, not $1 trillion. $1 trillion is the deficit. I said I'm in $100 billion for the year. He said, yeah, $1 trillion for 10 years. And then you know what Bernanke said after that? Bernanke said, he just kind of laughed and he said, oh, $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there.
Oh my God.
You gotta look it up, man. It's
The
so
Federal
hilarious.
Reserve chairman just said $1 trillion there,
He
$1
said-
trillion here. And people are not rioting to have this guy killed,
he
to
said,
have him shot in the face. You know what? Because that kind of attitude with the nation's deficit, and people probably are going to, I'll probably have Secret Service agents like beat the shit out of me in about 10 days when they hear this podcast. But that's tantamount to treason to the United States. You're taking money. Your attitude towards the money that the nation, tax revenue and all that kind of stuff. Oh, $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there. Oh, it's only $100 billion. And you wonder why the nation is in such terrible problems, and why the dollar is so crappy
yeah.
is because there's a mostly bald bozo looking the clown motherfucker sitting on Capitol Hill who says, "Oh, $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there. It's only $100 billion." I mean, really? Really? You're in a Senate committee talking to senators. Elected officials represent the people of the nation, and you just looked him in the eye and laughed. If I was Jim the Mint, I would have said, "Sir, what are you laughing at? You think it's funny that we're in this much debt? You think it's funny that it'll be $100 billion? You think $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there is something appropriate to say to me? Please have this man removed from my presence right now. Please have him removed."
Yeah.
From this committee. You are no longer legitimate and no longer relevant to this conversation. Good day, sir.
Yeah. Well, and what's so funny to me is this whole. He made two false assumptions in his statement. The first one was that, well, most of the debt is long-term debt and it can't be revaluated if interest rates go up. The only problem with that assumption is that all of the long-term treasury bonds are being bought by the Federal Reserve in the first place. Right?
Yeah.
Everybody who's buying bonds, like foreign governments like China, they're all buying short-term bonds. If interest rates go up, those bond rates will go up. And so the reality is, and he said, if interest rates go up to 2%, and like Peter Schiff was talking about today, he was like 2%. That's still artificially low. That was like the bottom of the Greenspan era, and we all know Greenspan had rates almost the entire time artificially low. What happens if Volcker rates come in? You're talking about 16%, 20% interest rates at the Federal Reserve. What? I mean, you're talking about $1 trillion interest payments, and you're talking about essentially a default by the U.S. government, which the reality is I've always said this, that if the Federal Reserve just starts contracting credit, no one gets paid that money if the Fed is holding the bonds. I mean, if the Federal Reserve is our central bank, we don't owe them money.
Right.
We owe other governments money, but I've been saying, like China, some of these other countries, they can take a haircut. They made bad bets. They shouldn't have bet on the American people. We fucked them. I mean, it's kind of like if some guy comes up to me and says, "Hey man, I've been gambling, right? And I play blackjack every day. I do sports betting. I'm down probably $10 trillion, and I need some more money so I can keep gambling."
More of that money.
Yeah, if you do it, there's a good chance that I might be able. There's an off chance that I might actually win, because since I'm the government and I don't do anything productive, this money won't go to being productive. It'll just go to gambling. So whenever I don't, and the Chinese are like, well, that sounds reasonable. I mean, that's just a stupid. Okay. I mean, it's just a stupid fucking bet.
Oh, okay.
The reality is, it's kind of like the same people who bet on Facebook. You deserve to get raped.
Right.
You knew going in, if you would have read the prospectus said this company looks like it's probably going to be overvalued at the start. It's $200 billion. There's no way it's worth $200 billion. And people said, but it's Facebook. And they put their stupid fucking money in it, got on E-Trade, and said, I'm going to buy Facebook. I'm going to be rich. You fucking idiot.
That's a perfect analogy for America and the rest of the world. We are the Facebook of America. I mean, the Facebook of the world. And people were retarded because they looked at America's history and said, "Oh, America is so powerful and such an economic powerhouse." Since when? Since when have we been an economic powerhouse legitimately that wasn't just inflated bullcrap dollars and artificially low interest rates? Tell me since when? So yeah, you're right. All these countries that bought into the Fed bullshit and bought our bonds, they can go take a walk because they're idiots, and I don't feel bad about it. Yeah, it's going to hurt us, but at the same time, that needs to happen. A lot of things need to happen. They're going to hurt.
Oh
And
yeah.
sorry, you have to pay the piper eventually. You can't just keep dancing around like a faggot and think that one day everything's going to be awesome. It's not.
Basically. All right, that's enough of the rants. We're gonna go to our last topic of the day, Chris.
I don't apologize
yeah.
for using the word faggot. I do apologize if anyone is gay, but sometimes you got to use the word faggot.
So sometimes it is necessary and appropriate. Going on to the last topic of this evening, Chris found an interesting question on a forum that he found intriguing. Basically, it was if presidents only had one term and they could do anything they wanted to because of lack of political pressure on them, what would that look like? I'm going to just give my vantage point on it to begin with, and then I'll let Chris go on his tirade.
Well, the question or the
go ahead and rephrase it for me.
Yeah. The question, the assumption wasn't what if presidents plural. It was what if we had a president because of all these hard things we talk about have to be done or whatever, and we all know the political game is get reelected. So what if a president ran on a platform of I'm going to fix as much as I can? Let's say Ron Paul had done this at the beginning of this election. He said, I'm going to fix all these things, and this is how I'm going to do it. Or even Mitt Romney. Yeah. And he said, and I promise I will even sign a law if you want or something, make it legally binding. It says I will not seek re-election. Therefore, I do not care who I offend. I do not care what special interest groups want me to work for them. I do not care what lobbyists come up to my office. None of that. So whatever I do will be in the best interest of the country. You know what? I'll add more to this later. But let's just that was the thing. What if he just ran on a one term and said, I will not run for re-election. I'm going to do unpopular things. Elect me if you want to get things done, but it's going to hurt.
Right. Well, three things come to mind to me, and actually it's two things, but one of them could be split into two different types of people. You've got really your ideologically pure people would be more palatable because the reality is since you don't have to compromise, you don't have to do anything like that, you don't have to worry about re-election, you would just go out and you would either end up with a radical libertarian or a radical socialist. Because it would be all about principle. It would all be about, I'm a socialist. I believe in pure Leninist socialism. We don't have that. That's the problem. Or it'd be a libertarian saying, hey, I believe in pure free market capitalism. We don't have that. We have fascism, whatever. I'm going to make that happen, right? The third thing or the second thing, depending on if you split that first point into two, the third one would be essentially – you would still have political opportunists. And what I mean by you would still have political opportunists is you would still have people because of the revolving door and the mechanisms that are currently in place who would be able to say, hey, look, I know you can't seek re-election, but if you follow X, Y, and Z policies, if you continue the corporatism and continue feeding us money or whatever through the Fed or through bailouts or whatever, if you continue those policies, once you're out of office, you'll be able to come work for Goldman Sachs. You'll be able to come work for Boeing. You'll be able to come work for Lockheed Martin. You'll be able to be a lobbyist for us. You'll be able to do this. A lot of that goes on right now, especially when people get to like their last term in Congress and they're older and they're going to retire from Congress. Nine times out of 10, they walk right across the street to K Street and they get a job at a lobbying firm working for either the military-industrial complex or the welfare-industrial complex or whatever. They work somewhere where they're able to basically peddle their government influence and make money off of it that way. They actually make more money doing that. It's kind of like Trent Lott. Trent Lott was big against – I forgot what he was big against. It was something to do with I don't know if it was unions or I can't remember what it was. But basically when he was a senator, he was against it. When he went and worked for the lobbying firm that was for it, he just changed positions and now he's for it. And same thing with the former Homeland Security Director after the first guy. I forgot his name, but basically he works for the company that manufactures the body scanners at the airport.
Right.
So like
conflict of interest much?
Yeah, well, he signed the contract for those to go in place because it was before Janet Napolitano got there.
Right.
He had already signed the contract to put those into place, and then when Bush left office, he left with Bush and then went right over there, and now he's profiting off of the body scanners that he signed to get into the airports. So,
Ridiculous.
Like I said, I'm pretty certain that even if a president had one term, even if that was legally binding, unless you also make it legally binding that after leaving office, the type of occupation that he would be allowed to pursue would not be one where he was able to peddle his government influence.
Or you go back to doing whatever it was before
you can go back to doing it. Yeah, exactly. You can go back to doing whatever you were doing beforehand. Or if you want to write a book, some people could call that peddling influence because you're using your.
Fine.
But that write a book, give speeches. Speeches are fine. But what I mean is basically using
you can't go work for a company that has anything to do with lobbying for anything.
Yeah, getting government contracts, things like that. That would have to be in there, or you would still have probably the same problems that you have right now. But that's my take on it. What do you think, Chris?
I think it's a good idea, but what I was going to add earlier, and I kind of didn't want to jump into the discussion yet, let you talk. But the another thing that, like, I'm just saying, if it was me, and I said Chris Smithson is running for president of the United States, I run on a platform of liberty and reform, and we're going to get the country going to where it needs to be, guys. It's going to hurt. It's going to hurt for a shorter period of time than it would if we didn't do it. Because right now, how you like where the country is right now? Oh, that's right, you don't. So it's going to hurt for a little while, but I won't run to get reelected. And the reason I'm doing that is so that you know that I won't be influenced by lobbyists and whatever, and impose the things you just said so that everybody really knows it's not going to happen. And then say, I'm going to give a list of things that I'm going to do. And here's the list. Boom, 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 boom. Now, I'm holding a general vote, a populist vote. You can go on Tuesday to your local voting or polling location, fire station, church, school, whatever, just like it's a presidential election. And you can vote on the list, and on the list, things on the list individually, state by state, city by city, town by town. And at the end of all this, when it comes in, I will post the results. And if you don't want me to do something on this list, I won't do it. But guess what? You're going to be saddled with those responsibilities. I've given you the suggestions, and I just want to know if you want to go with them. So here's what I'm going to do. And then you can have a referendum, a national referendum on these things, and you can explain each one. Obviously, you can't just say I'm cutting Medicaid and not explain what you mean by it and what you're going to do, in the meantime, and how you're going to do things. But you could say, here's what we're going to do. Go vote on it. And as a country, I'll take it into consideration. This has never been tried before in the history of the United States, and on this level. It is on a state by state, city by city level. They do have like Prop 8 and stuff like that come through, and people vote on it.
Different propositions.
Right. So we're just going to take it to the national stage. I'm just going to propose these things, show you why I think they would work, show you some other people that here's these guys that say it would work, and nation vote on it. And I think if you did that, then when things went well, people could take ownership of that and say, you know what, I voted for that, and we got, it got better. And if things got worse on the things they didn't vote for, like if they voted no on some things, they would also see, oh, this didn't get any better. Maybe we should have done that. So down the road, it opens up the possibility that other presidents could come in and say, hey, remember what President Smithson tried and how this worked and that happened? It worked, right? So maybe that would set a precedent for presidents to submit things to the people, because I think that's one of the most valued thing that the president does. Not the president, just any president, is appeal to the people that elected you. How often do you see the president go on TV and say, other than the Obama tried to do it with his budget, which was ridiculous, and no one even thought that there was any way that was going to get done, but he did it just on television. How many times have you seen a president get on television and say, here's my specific plan. I need you, the people, to make this happen. So I've also introduced legislation to make it to where you all can vote on it. You elected us for us to vote on things, but obviously we're not getting the job done that you want us to do because the country's not going anywhere that it should. So as your president, I think that this is what you want, just like the healthcare reform. I think this is what you want. So if you do or do not want this,
Sorry, guys, we lost Chris there for a second. Let me see if I can get him back on, and he'll just pick up in the middle of the conversation. Hold on 1 second.
You could do a 1-800 number. They have to be official. There's nothing against the president saying, go to my Twitter or not Twitter, go to this website or call this 1-800 number. Just like American Idol. Seems like America in the millions will watch a TV show about idiots singing, but month after month and dial in and vote for who they want. Why wouldn't they call a 1-800 number and vote for yes or no on something the president thinks is important? And then how much more power does he have when he can go, see the screen behind me? America wants a health reform on a scale of 65% and positive for. So therefore, Congress, you should probably do what I want to say, because if you don't, I'm going to also come back on TV, because no one can stop me, and list what you individually voted for, yes or no, on this. I'm going to scroll the names by. You voted yes for the healthcare bill. Here's this guy, here's this guy, here's this guy. You voted no. Here's this guy, here's this guy, here's this guy. So I suggest, based on what America wants, you go along with me. Why does not in an era that we have right now of social media and people connecting via all the technology we have now, doesn't that happen? And you would think that it would. And I think I would do that. I think that's a big deal. But it just goes back into the one-term thing, because if it wasn't popular, it wouldn't matter.
Yeah, well, and I think that would be cool. It's a cool concept. What I worry specifically about is the fact that if America was a really productive country that believed in capitalism, it would be great. Unfortunately, There's so many people that are on the government dole at this point that all they care about is that's really what they care about. They don't really care about fixing the problem per se. They just want to make sure that they're not affected. And it's this whole zombie mentality. I made a comment on my last podcast, actually not the last one, the one before that, where basically I talked about the state just grinding zombies into mush.
Right.
Because I was like, people are zombies. They're eating other people's faces off. Just proves my point. They're zombies. And they're already zombies, but that's not enough. They're already servants of the state. It's not enough. They really just want to crush you. But the reality is, the people, it seems like they want that. It's almost like we haven't proven quite yet that socialism fails.
Right.
It's almost like, people just don't really get it. And the thing is, what they really don't get is that socialism isn't new. Actually, socialism wasn't born with Karl Marx, as many people believe.
It's just for a while.
It's just been renamed. The idea of the state controlling the factors of production, that's not new. I mean,
right.
What do you think kings did, monarchies did? The old school, in the Middle Ages and stuff. I mean, they basically controlled all the factors of production, which is why things didn't advance.
Why do they think that America was even formed? Because we got away from tyrannical rule of another country, our parent country, that had unfair taxes and control of all trade. Yeah. And you had to have the king's blessing, and you had the royal this and the royal that, which were just state-run businesses that operated under the guise
of the state,
of government going to help you. Oh, we're the Royal Merchant Marine or the Royal Merchant Academy or whatever. And no, it's the king taking your money and doing what he wants with it.
Well, and that's something else too that was in Albert J. Nock's book. He breaks down basically a historical view of the state and what the state is, and why the state is not actually government or the law. It's just extrajudicially, basically. It's not the law. It essentially is basically a positive interventionist force, either on behalf of the proletariat or business or even the masses in the form of communism. It's basically people outside of the law vying for control of the political means of power. And that's what the state is. He broke. Right. I didn't know this, but George Washington owned a company that basically, companies at the time, because they had royal privilege to operate in the colonies, were essentially like forms of the state. Certain companies actually owned entire colonies. They they had land rights. They owned all the land. You had to rent the land from the business that only has the land because of their connections with the British royalty. And so Washington actually owned or was a co-owner or was high up basically in a company that had a stake in continuing to move westward. However, part of what the British did during the revolutionary time period, during that time period where people started to rise up, the taxes and everything, something you'll hear about in the regular history books, they actually drew a line and said, you cannot move further west than this line.
Right.
So Washington's like, this is bullshit. My financial stake is continuing to move west. So that got him involved. The only one of like Sam Adams, John Adams, all these people had certain financial interests that were at stake. The only one that really didn't was Thomas Jefferson, who was more or less just a principled guy. And I'm not saying the other founders were bad. They were great guys. They fought for the right reasons. But really what got them involved in saying this is bullshit was, the British basically cracking down on any sort of free enterprising spirit.
But wait a minute,
in the
Chad.
colony.
So you're saying that the founding fathers were motivated by greed and that they wanted to benefit by the fruits of their own labors and the sweat of their own brow, and because the government told them that they couldn't, that they rebelled against it. Those greedy Wall Street bastards. So the founding fathers were Wall Street fat cats who wanted to expand at the detriment to the little guy who could go west because no one went west that was not rich. And so that's why they got involved at first in the revolutionary principles of liberty.
Well, Adams has had an interesting quote talking about the natural aristocracy, if you will. Certain people naturally rise to the top.
Of course.
And I'll take H.L. Mencken's point. I don't know if you know who that is. He made a point about the aristocracy. He said there is differences between men. Certain men will rise to the top. Certain men won't. He said, however, the fact that there's a natural aristocracy cannot be used as an excuse for government to basically uphold that natural aristocracy. It's a meritocracy. You can only stay there as long as you justify your existence at being there, basically.
Right, which on a micro level, everybody would agree with. If you brought that down to their level in their own life, if you said, hey, do you think that a student that works hard should get A's? Yes. Do you think that a student who doesn't work hard should not get A's? Well, yeah, I believe that. Well, then why are we having this discussion? Because that's the same thing that happens on the national level with the 1% is, do you think that person that worked hard to have billions of dollars should have it? No.
Unless they didn't work hard. Unless they didn't work hard to get the billions.
Well, even if they didn't work hard to get the billions, somebody did. You know what I mean? Somebody worked hard to get the billions. For the most part, I'm talking about people that inherited their money or were given a business or whatever, something like that.
No, but that's not necessarily true either, Chris. Because not everyone, in fact, most people in the 1%, most business owners, like even big businesses, some of them actually don't even classify as the 1%. Like they make $500,000 a year. Like they talk about like some of these CEOs are like, they make $5 million a year. It's like, okay, well, this hedge fund manager didn't create anything. He basically has made money off of Federal Reserve notes being printed out of thin air. And he's a billionaire hedge fund manager. He created nothing. That business owner, he may make $5 million, right? He made $5 billion. There's a couple billionaire. There's some billionaire business owners too, but I'm making the
Bill
point.
Gates.
Yeah, Bill Gates created something. He created a dynasty. He's a son of a bitch. He's a eugenicist, and I don't like that because he wants to kill people. But regardless,
so do I. I would kill people too, though.
Bill Gates wants to kill people for different reasons, Chris.
Oh.
But my point is that it goes back to basically what I was saying with H.L. Mencken. He said you have to justify your existence. If your existence is only there, not because of your productive capacity or your ability to create wealth and basically expand the economic pie, if your whole point is there to basically leech off of the Federal Reserve printing notes and inflating the currency, that's not productive. The only reason why you're in that position is because of the Federal Reserve and because the government controls the monetary system. If the government didn't control the monetary system, yeah, you would have people who made money in the financial sector, but it wouldn't be the biggest sector of the economy. The biggest sector of the economy would be the sectors that produce the most wealth. You know, simply moving money around, yeah, part of it produces wealth because if you move money around efficiently, you can direct money towards its most efficient, resources, and that helps grow the economy too. But it's definitely not the most productive sector of any economy. So the fact that it's the biggest sector of the U.S. economy should tell you something. It should tell you that overall it's not productive. Overall, there's fat cats. The only reason why they're fat cats is not because they built a business that that was productive and created wealth for everybody. They're there because of government. And that's what the Occupy crowd doesn't get. They don't see the government angle.
Even then, I don't blame those people. I don't blame the hedge fund guy. I don't fault him. Good for you. Great. You took advantage of the government for what it set up. I blame the government. I blame the politicians who enacted those things that allowed people to do that. I don't blame anyone for taking advantage of anything that's given to them or opportunities that are given to them. Just like but the problem is though that we talk about. You said that the problem with the whole president thing that we were talking about, the one term and all that, is that in voting and giving people the chance to vote on things that would necessarily hurt them in the short term but be better for the country in the long term. And you said, well, we have a bunch of people on the government ticket, on the government dole, and people wouldn't want to do that in some instances. Is that at the end of the day, you're right. People want the nation to get better, but only if it doesn't affect them.
Yeah.
So it's easy for one side or the other to say, we want to make the nation better, we want to do these things, it's going to hurt. But the other side wants to take this away from you. So be enraged with the other side. And so the problem would be like saying, we're going to cut back on federal workers' compensation across the board. That means retirement funds, pensions, salary, benefits, all that stuff. We're going to cut across it. Well, right there, you've lost every government worker there is, unless they're supremely principled, because it affects them, and they're going to sit at home at night and say, "Yeah, I get a government car, and I can retire at the age of 35 or 45 or whatever the hell it is, and I get 3/4 of my salary for life after that, and insurance forever, and all these benefits." And it's awesome. And someone could say to them, well, you realize you're getting paid way more than a private sector person does, and these studies show that your productivity is way lower. So it's not really fair. We're going to adjust it. And that person would go ape shit.
Yeah.
And that I don't blame them. Yeah. But that is the government's fault. And the government is us. And we've for too long we've let it go on.
Yeah.
We've let people live on that. And you're 100% right. So there are some things that a president that went on one term would have to just do and not put them to a vote and say, here's the things I'm going to do, regardless of whether you want them done, because there's too many people involved in it that it's going to hurt for the short term. So I'm just doing it. Here's some things that you can vote on. So maybe divvy it up that way.
Yeah. I mean, definitely what would end up happening is anytime you take away the political means of power, you take that away from special interest groups. The only people who are happy are the people like you and me who work in the private sector. We actually produce things. We make things of value. And the only way we get paid is if we make things of value. The government workers, I don't fault them for taking a government job. I don't fault them for believing that they were going to get a pension. Unfortunately, they're not producing value. They might be producing some value, but there's no way for us to measure that because there's no price mechanism. So we don't know.
Right.
We don't know if you're making anything of value or not. The same goes. That's why if you look at it, let's say if you take a union worker and you say, hey, what do you think about the government cutting or limiting collective bargaining rights or doing away with the government enforcing collective bargaining rights? Or what do you think about government workers not getting all of their pension or having their wages cut? Oh, I hate that. They get mad about it. Same thing goes for the hedge fund manager. If I set a hedge fund manager down and said, "Hey, what do you think if I just ended the Federal Reserve and the only way you could get access to capital is if people saved the money and you had to like take money from people who are willing to save it and loan it to you to where you could invest it." The economy can't run like that. We collapse. We can't run like that. So you're saying you wouldn't be able to make as much money, is what you're telling me.
Right, it affects that person.
It affects that person.
It's the same way if you have a riot in the street and people are looting a store, they're getting free. They're running in, they're grabbing 50-inch LCD flat panel televisions, and you run up to them as a police officer with a gun, and you say, "Hey, motherfucker, you can't do that." They're gonna be like, they're not gonna like that, right?
Right.
What they're doing is beneficial to them. Hooray, free TVs! They can get all the TVs that the store has. But at the end of the day, it's more harmful than it is beneficial. They just don't see it because they're not the business owner. They're not the local economy. They have no investment in that. And so, of course, they're going to be pissed at the cop and maybe try to kill him or run away or drop the TV or whatever, or not agree with it or band up with other looters and kill him. But the point is that is exactly what – I'm not saying that they're evil like that, but that's exactly what you have when you have people like unionize or – government workers or people who are on Medicaid and Medicare or Social Security or unemployment. They don't realize what you're on right now is not sustainable. You're looting from the United States of America because it's been granted to you. We left the door open. But when the cop comes along and tells you that you're looting and you can't do it anymore, you're going to be pissed.
Yeah. Well, the dependent class upon the government has surpassed the productive class. Is the word I'm looking for, and it's even worse than what they say it is, because typically when they say the dependent class, they only count people who are dependent on like certain government programs. They're not counting the people who are dependent upon the government for a paycheck. Period. What about the people in the military? What about the people in every other government agency?
Let's factor in students who some live off low to no interest federal student loans.
Yeah, subsidized loans, grants. Let's look at anybody who receives government contracts. So all the defense contractors. Postal workers. It is so outrageous that the level. I would say at this point in time that 60%, maybe quite not that much, are people who work somewhere that's tied to getting a government contract or working directly for government. If government were gone, those people would immediately come and they would basically rob all the productive people and kill us, probably. I'm serious. That would probably they would riot, and they would say, take everything. And that's what's so sad about like people like the Occupy people, is they get manipulated like people like Soros. Because they're like, get the 1%. But really what it means is don't get the 1%. Get the middle-class entrepreneur who's trying to build a business. Get the millionaire who is actually in the economy, making things productive, making things happen. That's what it really means. Warren Buffett gets out there and says, we need to raise taxes. Not on me. Not on me,
right.
On productive people, because Warren Buffett got bailout money from Bank of America because he was one of the biggest shareholders of Bank of America who got bailed out. So the reality is they're all tied to government. The 1% is tied to government, not the bottom 99%. The bottom 40% are tied to government somehow, at least, where their livelihood.
Right, and that's the biggest disparity that I can find, is that the people that want the 1%, which really, like you said, when they say 1%, they think they mean 1%. They really mean, like you said, the middle class, upper middle class, and the 1% all tied into one. But they mean really the upper 50% of the nation.
Yeah, anyone who works for a living and is productive and makes money.
Right. They mean that. But what they don't realize is that you want them to pay more in taxes to basically punish them for their wealth, so that they pay more to get us out of where we are and hopefully cut spending. The problem with that is the terminology that's always used. You see the signs, you see people say it online, you see people say it in interviews. We want the 1% to pay their fair share. Really? So let's look, what does fair mean? So fair, you want to use the word fair. Fair share. If I'm a billionaire, how much in taxes do I pay? in the millions. In the millions. In the 20s to 30 to 40 to 50 to 60 million.
Yeah.
Depending on how much money I have.
Yeah, it depends on how you made your money.
Yeah, I'm just saying, but you pay a ton of money in taxes, okay? We're talking millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars, okay? Now, that money, if I'm not paying my fair share, then what am I getting in return for that money? Do I get to drive in a certain lane on the highway that's just for people that pay their fair share? Do I get better health insurance? Do I get to skip the line at Walmart? Do I get food stamps? Do I get cash for clunkers? Do I get anything? Do I get anything more for paying more? Is that fair? Well, you can walk up to a 3-year-old in a daycare and say, I'm gonna
take this toy.
I want Johnny to walk over there and pick up 5 toys. And if he picks up 5 toys, I'm gonna give him 3 cookies. I want you to go pick up and put away 10 toys. And if you pick up 10 toys, I'm going to give you 2 cookies. That's not fair. You did more work, right? So you should get more cookies. You can teach that lesson to a 3-year-old, but you can't teach it to a 20-year-old, 40-year-old, 60-year-old, 70-year-old person for some reason, because we're all tied up in ourselves and we don't understand that the 1%, which is really the top 50 or more percent, they pay more than their fair share. Believe me. And they get nothing in return for it. Nothing. Do you know what government assistance I've ever gotten? 0. I make more money than most people that listen to this podcast combined, and I will never get anything from the government for it. They keep a lot of my money at the end of the year, and you know what I get for it? Nothing. I get to watch the news, and I get to see people complain that I'm not paying my fair share.
Yeah, I mean, because basically, Chris, you're evil, and
I am.
Essentially, that's it's evil to make money. It's evil to produce things. Basically, it's I would rather I'm going to school, and so I don't work, but so you should give me your money. I mean. The most crazy thing I saw, you like to talk about the Wall Street people or whatever, and I've heard other people say this, is the most absurd thing I heard them say was everyone should be guaranteed a living wage from the government. Well, what? Where does that come from? What did you do to earn that? Just because you're alive? So you're alive, so I give you money? Mm-hmm. That's not how life works. Yeah. I have human dignity. You do have human dignity. Why don't you show some and work for a living?
Yeah. Why don't you go do something? Why don't you go knock on your neighbor's door and ask them if they want you to tear down that terrible, god-awful tree that died in their front yard 3 years ago and quote them a price for it? Why don't you go do that and make some money? And maybe you'll start a tree tearing down company and become a millionaire. Or you can sit in your house or your project or your parents' basement and complain that the government isn't you have no human dignity because no one will just give you money. Well, go ask a beggar, a real beggar, not someone who begs for a living, a real, honest-to-goodness, homeless beggar, how much dignity they have and how proud it makes them to feel to sit on the corner and ask for handouts from people. That's exactly what you're doing when you say you should be given a living wage, or you don't have dignity because no one gives you money for just being a person, or you don't get free health care because you deserve it. You need human dignity, and your life is precious, and you should be guaranteed it. Which, another podcast, you probably need to wrap this up, but another podcast topic would be, why do you as a human need health care? And that's part of, this is so ridiculous, that's part of being a human. That's what people say for the healthcare argument. Universal healthcare is everybody is a human and their life is life and they should be protected by healthcare. Same people will say in the same breath, except for unborn babies.
Yeah, exactly.
They should be stabbed in the face before they are born, their limbs hacked and chopped and sucked out of a vagina with a vacuum cleaner, and that is perfectly fine. But the mother, who is okay with that, should be given free health care because her life is so precious. Yeah. And if she has a sore throat, she should be able to go to the doctor, and everyone foots the bill except that baby. Kill that fucking
Yeah.
baby.
Yeah, and it's almost like this, Chris. It's almost like this. It's like, okay, look, this is what we believe, okay? I'm a liberal. Well, I'm not really a liberal. I'm a socialist. And this is what I believe. What I believe is that a woman has a choice. She has a choice to choose whether the unborn child lives or dies. The child does not have a right to life. The woman's choice is what really matters. Okay. Now, you, on the other hand, you do not have a choice to make money. Okay. Other people's lives matter and their human dignity matters. Their right to life is more important than your right to choose how you make a living and how much money to make. So they're only pro-choice. That's the only instance that they're pro-choice. It's when it involves killing an unborn child. It's like a sacrament of death where they feed off of it. They're so evil. It's ridiculous. I got a quote up. We're going to end this up. We've gone far too long, Chris. We're ridiculous. You know that?
We always do, man.
Yeah.
I'm surprised anybody even listens to this crap because it goes for so long.
Yeah, I've been trying to limit it to like 30 minutes, but someone's going to listen to it. Okay, we're just too entertaining for them not to. So I've got a quote that I'm going to read. It's from Albert J. Nock's book, Our Enemy of the State, and it was probably one of my favorite quotes that I've read in a long time. And it goes like this.
Is that a 1% e-reader you're reading it off of?
We mean a 1% e-reader. I don't understand what that means.
Only the 1% can afford e-readers, Chad.
Yeah, I mean it was only $130, so
that's ridiculous. That's a lot of money.
So, Chris, I shut this and I lost my clippings, okay?
I'm sorry, buddy.
You
ass.
That's
what you get for being the 1%.
Yeah, hold on a second. I'm going to open this back up. There it is. Okay, here we go. Republicanism permits the individual to persuade himself that the state is his creation, that state action is his action, and when it expresses itself, it expresses him, and when it is glorified, he is glorified. The Republican state encourages this persuasion with all its power, aware that it is the most efficient instrument for enhancing its own prestige. Lincoln's phrase, "of the people, by the people, and for the people," was probably the most effective single stroke of propaganda ever made in behalf of the Republican state prestige.
Wow. And
that was by Albert J. Nock. That was written in 1935 or 1932. Yeah. The guy was a genius. I'm reading a few of his books. There's a lot of great thinkers, old great thinkers that from the libertarian camp that a lot of people don't know that are dead. Yes, of course they are deceased. And it's very sad that they could not live forever and be biological androids. So like Data. So other than that, that's all I have. Chris, do you have any closing remarks today?
This podcast has been brought to you by Thomas Howell, Milton Friedman, F.A. Hayek, who am I missing? Ron Paul.
I'm gonna go through the Austrians because Chris doesn't go through all except for Hayek. I'm gonna skip Hayek. This is brought to you by Ludwig van Mises, Murray Rothbard, Carl Menger, and Henry Hazlitt, as well as Chris said, F.A. Hayek. Who am I missing? I mean, there's just so many. Wilhelm Röpke, I'm reading a book by him right now. He was a good Austrian economist. He was more like Hayek in a lot of respects. So it's brought to you by everybody who ever thought for themselves. That's who it's brought to you by. So
so I think I'm gonna start ending the podcast by saying that. So people, maybe you'll go out and read some of the or look up some of these people. Oh, and John Stossel. It's also brought to you by John Stossel.
Yeah.
So
Judge Napolitano.
Judge Napolitano. So Remember these names. Rewind. Write them down. Go find things they've done. Google it. Look for videos that they've done, or if they were too old before video was out and now they're dead. Look up their books or quotes and enlighten yourselves, because the mainstream media is just going to feed you bullshit forever.
Bullshit. All right, guys. That's it for the podcast. We've gone on incredibly too long. This was the Libertarian Podcast. I will probably see you tomorrow because I've got to do this Peter Schiff one as well. So you guys have a good night. Peace.
Later. Peace.